You were the top presidential advisor to former President Donald Trump on Russia and Europe, and famously testified in his first impeachment trial in 2019, saying, "I take great pride in the fact that I'm nonpartisan foreign policy expert." So, given that context, what does nonpartisan mean to you?
Well, it means being very careful about not putting any kind of ideological lens on anything, that I'm analysing or looking at or saying about foreign policy, for one thing, but also not taking, kind of one stance of one party over another either. To be honest, I've always found American politics somewhat confounding
Mhm.
because both the Democratic and the Republican Party are pretty big tents. I mean, they're coalitions. In Europe, it's actually kind of, in some respects, easier to navigate the parameters of political parties because you have quite clear platforms. There's also a longer history in many respects, obviously. I mean, there's a long history here in the United States of the development of the parties, going back to the late 18th century. But in the United Kingdom, for example, in the 20th century, the development of the mass parties, was quite easy to get a handle on. At one point in the UK, for example, the parties were real, genuine mass parties with people who were properly members and took part in regular meetings and paid dues. And, it was easy to kind of see what they stood for. And the same in Europe, when you look at France and in Germany and Western Germany, of course, Italy and elsewhere. Here in the United States, it's kind of pretty amorphous. The fact that you could kind of register, randomly, it seems to be a Democrat or Republican, like Trump did.
Mm-hmm.
At one point he's a Democrat, next thing he's a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of usurp a party apparatus. But you don't have to be, you're not vetted in any way. You're not kind of, but they don't check you out to see if you have ideological coherence. You could have someone like Bernie Sanders on the other side, on the left, basically calling himself a socialist and, running for the Democratic presidential nomination. So, kind of in many respects, parties in the United States are much more loose movements. And I think you can, it's almost like a kind of an a la carte menu of different things and that people can pick out. And it's more over time, as I've noticed, become more like a kind of an affiliation even with a sporting team. I mean, I get very shocked by the way that people say, well, I couldn't do this because, that's my side and I couldn't do anything and I couldn't support someone for the other side. I mean, I have a relative in my extended family here who is a died in the wool Republican, and on family holiday was a book on their table said 100 reasons for voting for a Democrat, and I said, hey, are you thinking of shifting party affiliation? Then I opened the book and it's blank. It was pretty funny. I had to laugh. Right. I thought, well, there you go then. There's no way that people can pull themselves out of these frames. So for me, it's very important to have that independence of thought. Mm-hmm. I think you can be politically engaged on the issues, but, basically without taking a stance that's defined by some ideology or some sense of kind of partisan affiliation.
I think I tweeted about this, maybe not eloquently. And the statement, if I remember correctly, was something like, if you honestly can't find a good thing that Donald Trump did or a good thing that Joe Biden did, you're not thinking about ideas. You just picked the tribe. I mean, it was more eloquent than that, but it's basically, this is a really good test to see, are you actually thinking about like how to solve problems versus like your red team or blue team, like a sporting team. Can you find a good idea of Donald Trump's that you like if you're somebody who's against Donald Trump, and like acknowledge it to yourself privately? Oh, that's a good idea. I'm glad he said that.
Or he's even asking the right kinds of questions, which he often did, actually. I mean, obviously he put them in a way that most of us wouldn't have done. But there was often kind of questions about, why is this happening? Why are we doing this? And, we have to challenge ourselves all the time. So, yeah, actually, why are we doing that? And then you have to really inspect it and say whether it's actually worth continuing that way or whether you should be doing something differently. Now, he had a more kind of destructive quality to those kinds of questions. But maybe it's the real estate developer in him that was, taking a big wrecking ball to all of these kinds of, sacred edifices and things like that. But often, if you really paid attention, he was asking a valid set of questions about why do we continue to do things like this. Now, we didn't often have answers about what he was going to do in response, but those questions still had to be asked, and we shouldn't be just rejecting them, out of turn.
And, the another strength, the thing that people often that criticize Donald Trump will say is a weakness, is his lack of civility can be a strength, because I feel like sometimes bureaucracy functions on excessive civility. Like actually, I've seen this. It's bureaucracy in all forms. Like in tech companies, as they grow, everybody kind of, you're getting a pretty good salary. Everyone's comfortable, and there's a meeting, and you discuss how to move stuff forward, and like, you don't want to be the asshole in the room that says, why are we doing this way? This is this could be unethical. This is hurting the world. This is totally a dumb idea. Like, I mean, I could give specific examples that I have on my mind currently that are technical, but the point is, oftentimes the person that's needed in that room is an asshole.
Yeah.
That's why Steve Jobs worked. That's why Elon Musk works. You have to roll in. That's what first principles thinking looks like.
The one bit when it doesn't work is when they start name calling,
Sure.
kind of inciting violence against, the people that they disagree with. So that was kind of a problem, because I mean, often when, when I was in the administration, I had all of Europe in my portfolio as well as Russia. And there were many times when, we were dealing with our European colleagues where he was asking some pretty valid questions about, well, why should we do this if you're doing that? For example, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The United States has been opposed to Europe's reliance on gas and oil exports from Russia, the Soviet Union, since the 70s and 80s. And Trump kept pushing this idea about, so why are we, spending so much money on NATO and NATO defense, and we're all talking about this, if you're then, basically paying billions, to Russia for gas? Isn't this, contradictory? And of course it was. But it was the way that he did it. And I actually, one instance had a discussion with a European defense minister who basically said to me, look, he's saying exactly the same things as people said before him, including, former Defense Secretary Gates. It's just the way he says it. Mm-hmm. So they took offense. And then as a result of that, they wouldn't take action because they took offense at what he said. So it was a kind of then a way of, could you find some other means of, massaging this communication to kind of make it effective, which we would always try to focus on. Because it's a kind of it was the delivery, but the actual message was often spot on in those kinds of issues. I mean, he was actually highlighting, these ridiculous discrepancies between what people said and what they actually did.
And it's the delivery, the charisma in the room too. I'm also understanding the power of that, of a leader. It's not just about what you do at a podium, but in a room with advisors, how you talk about stuff, how you convince other leaders.
Yeah, you don't do it through gratuitous insults and incitement to violence. That's one of the things you don't get anywhere on that front.
Well, I mean, it's possible.
Tough measures and maximum pressure often, though, does work.
Right.
Because there were, often times where, that kind of relentless, nagging about something or constantly raising it actually did have results where it hadn't previously.
Right.
So there's, the maximum pressure, if it, kind of kept on it in the right way. And, often when we were, coming in behind on pushing on issues, related to NATO or, other things in this, same sphere, it would actually have an effect. It just doesn't get talked about because it gets overshadowed by, all of the other kind of stuff around this and the way that, he interacted with people and treated people.
What was the key insights to your testimony in that impeachment?
Look, I think there is a straight line between that whole series of episodes and the current war in Ukraine. Because Vladimir Putin and the people around him in the Kremlin concluded that the US did not care one little bit about Ukraine and it was just a game. For Trump, it was a personal game. He was basically trying to get Volodymyr Zelensky to do him a personal favor related to his desire to stay on in power in the 2020 election. And generally, they just thought that we were using Ukraine as some kind of proxy or some kind of instrument within our own domestic politics, as that's what it looked like. And I think that, as a result of that, Putin, took the idea away that he could, do whatever he wanted. We were constantly being asked, even prior to this, by people around Putin, like, Nikolai Patrushev, the head of the National, Security Council equivalent in Russia, who we met with frequently. What's Ukraine to you? We don't get it. Why do you even care? So they thought that we weren't serious. That we weren't serious about Ukraine's territorial integrity and its independence, or it is a national security player.
Mhm.
And Putin also thought that he could just manipulate the political space in the United States. And actually, he could, because he was doing was seeding all this dissent and fueling, already debates inside of U.S. politics, the kinds of things that we see just kind of coming out now. This kind of idea that Ukraine was a burden, that Ukraine was basically just trying to extract things from the United States. The Ukraine had somehow played inside of U.S. politics. Trump was convinced that the Ukrainians had done something against him, that they had intervened in the elections. And that was kind of, a combination of people around him trying to find excuses to, kind of what had happened in the election to kind of divert attention away from Russia's interference in 2016 and the Russians themselves poisoning the well against Ukraine. So you had a kind of a confluence of circumstances there. And what I was trying to get across in that testimony was the national security imperative of basically getting our act together here and separating out what was going on in our domestic politics from what was happening in our national security and foreign policy. I mean, I think we contributed in that whole mess around the impeachment, but just the whole parallel policies around Ukraine to the war that we now have that we're confronting.
Signaling the value we place in peace and stability in that part of the world, or the reverse, by saying we don't care.
Yeah, we seem to not care. It was just a game.
But I mean, the U.S. role in that war is a very complicated one. That's That's one of the variables. Just on that testimony, did it in part break your heart that you had to testify essentially against the president of the United States? Or is that not how you saw it?
I don't think I would describe it in that way. I think what I was deeply disappointed by what I saw happening in the American political space. I didn't expect it. Look, I was a starry-eyed immigrant. Mm-hmm. I came to the United States with all of these expectations of what the place would be. I'd already been disabused of, some of the, let's just say, rosy perspectives I had in the United States. I'd been shocked by the depths of racial problems. It doesn't even sum up the problems we have in the United States. I mean, I couldn't get my head around it when I first came. I mean, I'd read about slavery in American history, but I hadn't fully fathomed, really the way that it was ripping apart the United States. I mean, I'd read Alexis de Tocqueville, and he'd commented on this, and it obviously hadn't, kind of changed to the way that one would have expected all this time, from the 18th, century onwards. So that was kind of one thing that, that I realized that the civil rights movement and all of these, acts of expansion of suffrage and everything else were imperfect at best. And I was born in 1965, the same time as the Civil Rights Act, and was a heck of a long way still to go. So I wasn't, let's just say, as starry-eyed about everything as I'd been before, but I really saw an incredible competence and professionalism in, the US government. It was, in the election system and the integrity of it. And I really saw that. I saw that the United States was the gold standard for, kind of some of its, institutions. And I worked in the National Intelligence Council, and I'd seen the way that the United States had tried to address the problems that it had faced in this just whole botched analysis of Iraq and this terrible strategic blunder of, honestly, a crime in my view of invading Iraq. And but the way that people were trying to deal with that in the aftermath. I mean, I went into the National Intelligence Council and the DNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, when they were coming to terms with what had gone wrong in the whole analysis about Iraq in 2003, in the whole wake of people trying to pull together after 9/11 and to learn all of the lessons from all of this. And I saw, just really genuine striving and deliberation about what had gone wrong, what lessons could we learn from this. And then suddenly I found myself in this, I couldn't really describe it in any words, just totally crazy looking glass, thinking of, Alice in Wonderland, Alice through the looking glass version of American politics. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd seen everything starting to unravel over a kind of a period of time before I'd been asked to be in the administration, but I did not expect it to be that bad. I honestly didn't. I mean, I'd been warned, by people that this was, kind of really a very serious turn that the United States had taken, but I really thought that national security would still be uppermost in people's minds. And it was, a lot of the people that I work with. But what I found, if you want to use that, term of heartbreaking, was the way in which all of these principles that I had really bought into and try to uphold in the United States government and in the things that we were trying to do with me and my colleagues was just being thrown out the window. And that, I would have to step up in defense of them and in defense of my colleagues who were being lambasted and, criticized and given death threats for actually standing up and doing their own jobs.
In particular on the topic of Ukraine?
Not just on Ukraine, but on national security overall. So, I'd gone through this whole period, even before we got to that point, of seeing non-partisan government officials being attacked from all sides, left and right, but especially the right, and being basically accused of being partisan hacks, deep state,
yes,
coup plotters, you name it. Their patriotism being questioned as well. And a lot of people I work with in government, like myself, naturalized Americans, a lot of them are immigrants, many were refugees. And many people had fought in wars on behalf of the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan being blown up. And, they'd put their lives on the line. They'd put their family lives on the line, because they believed in America. And they were reflections of Americans from all kinds of walks of life. Is what really made, that cliche of America great. It wasn't, whatever it was being, bandied around in these crude, crass political terms. It was just the strength of an incredible set of people who've come together from all kinds of places and decided that they're going to make a go of it and that they're going to, try to work towards the whole, idea of the preamble of the Constitution, towards a more perfect union. And I saw people doing that every single day, despite all of the things that they could criticize about the United States, still believing in what they were doing and believing in the promise of the country, which is what I felt like. And then here we were, people were just treating it like a game, and they were treating people like dirt, and they were just playing games with people's lives. We all had death threats, people's, whole careers, which were not just careers for their own self-aggrandizement, but for careers of public service, trying to give something back, were being shattered. And I found, I just thought to myself, I'm not going to let that happen because, I've come from are they going to send me back to Bishop Auckland in County Durham? Fine. I'm totally fine to go back, because I could do something back there. But I'm not going to let this happen. I've made this choice to come to America. I'm all in. And these guys are just behaving like a bunch of idiots and they're ruining it. They're ruining it for everybody.
So the personal attacks on competent, hardworking, passionate people who have love for what they do in their heart. Similar stuff I've seen for virologists and biologists, so colleagues, basically scientists in the time of COVID when there's a bunch of cynicism and there was just personal attacks, including death threats on people that work on viruses,
and they're going around
vaccines.
basically with protective gear on in case somebody shoots them in the street. That's just absurd.